what do you think happened to these three individuals after they killed Caesar? Right? They killed Caesar because they feared Caesar would become king. But after they killed Caesar, what they recognized is they could only kill Caesar because Caesar did not want to become king. Right? Otherwise, Caesar would surround himself with bodyguards. Otherwise, Caesar would not make himself available to his enemies. So upon the death of Caesar, all his enemies, Decimus, Marcus, and Cassius, realized they were in the wrong. But not only that, but the very attitude of the people of Rome changed, right? While Caesar was alive, the Roman people were very skeptical towards Caesar because they feared that he would become king, right? They loved Caesar, but they were afraid that Caesar was too ambitious. But upon the death of Caesar, the Roman people felt tremendous guilt for doubting Caesar. Does that make sense? Right? Because it was their doubt that allowed the conspirators to kill Caesar. If all they did was believe in Caesar, if they believed that in Caesar's myth that he was here as a man of destiny to restore the republic, and that's all he cared about, he didn't want to become king, then Caesar would still be alive. Okay? And to compound the guilt, Caesar showered the people with generosity upon his death, right? Okay? So you can see how the death of Caesar creates this new reality where people now recognize Caesar did not want to become king. All he wanted to do was save the republic. And people are now, they're sort of paralyzed by their guilt. All right? So the evidence for this is this. While Decimus Brutus was being attacked by Mark Antony and then later by Octavian, Cassius told Marcus Brutus, hey, maybe we should come to this guy's aid. He's our ally. If he falls, they're going to come after us next. And Marcus Brutus did nothing. He refused to act. All right? And the reason why is he could not act. He killed Julius Caesar because Julius Caesar was too ambitious. But if Marcus Brutus were to move his army against Rome, then Marcus Brutus is the ambitious one. He's the one who wants to become king. Right? Therefore, Marcus Brutus and Cassius could only wait for their deaths. Because the theory of the case, to believe that Caesar wanted to become king, wasn't true. It couldn't be true. And therefore, they committed wrong against Rome by killing Caesar. Okay? Does that make sense? So this explains his enemies. How about Mark Antony? Okay, so Mark Antony had a different problem. Mark Antony loved Caesar so much, he wanted to continue Caesar's legacy. And Mark Antony sort of felt betrayed by Caesar when Caesar named Octavian to be the heir and not Mark Antony. Okay? And so what does Mark Antony want to do now? Well, he wants to prove that Caesar's wrong. Mark Antony wants to prove that he is the rightful heir of Caesar, and to prove so, he will continue his legacy. Okay? So Mark Antony started to do things that were against his own personal self-interest and which ultimately led to his self-destruction. The first thing that he did was he marched against the Parthians. The Parthians are Rome's last great enemy, okay? Rome destroyed Carthage, Rome destroyed the Greeks, but the Parthians still had an empire to the east of Rome. And Roman generals failed to make inroads against Parthia. And in fact, Julius Caesar, he wanted to basically end his life by invading Parthia. Okay, so Julius Caesar's plan before his death was to attack Parthia, conquer it, and then sweep back to Europe and conquer Germany, okay? Basically conquer the whole world to prove he's better than Alexander the Great. So Mark Antony decides that this is how he will prove he is Caesar's rightful heir, by finishing Caesar's legacy against the Parthians. Okay? The problem is Romans are not good at war against the Parthians and the Persians. Okay? Because the Romans are infantry focused, and the Parthians and the Persians are cavalry focused. Right? They have horses. So Mark Antony goes over to Parthia, and he gets his ass kicked. All right? He gets his ass kicked. He's not Julius Caesar. He's not the heir to Julius Caesar. And he falls into a major depression. He basically becomes a drunk. Okay? That's his first major mistake. Second major mistake he makes is he falls in love with Cleopatra. Cleopatra is the queen of Egypt, but much more importantly, she is the mistress of Julius Caesar. In fact, rumors were that upon his retirement, Julius Caesar would bring Cleopatra to Rome and they would live happily ever after. Okay? That's the rumor. So Mark Antony goes over to Egypt and he becomes the lover to Cleopatra. Okay? Because he's trying to be Julius Caesar now. And this is a problem because to marry Cleopatra, he has to divorce his wife, who happens to be the sister of Octavian. Okay? So this causes a personal rift between Octavian and Mark Antony. And the third thing that he does, which is what causes his demise, is he names in his will, okay? He names in his will that his children of Cleopatra will become the heirs to the Roman East. All the property, all that land that Mark Antony controls will be given to his children with Cleopatra. They're foreign citizens. And also, Mark Antony does not have the authority to give that land out to his children. Only the Senate has the authority. Okay? So Octavian used the will as a pretext to attack Mark Antony. And he's heavily supported by the Roman people. Okay? So Mark Antony, because he's trying so hard to escape the shadow of Julius Caesar, because he's trying so hard to prove he is the legitimate heir to Julius Caesar, he basically self-destructs. He didn't have to do any of this, but he did. And by doing all this, it guarantees his destruction. Okay? So Mark Antony basically self-destructs. Let's look at Lepidus. Okay? Lepidus, he is an extremely effective administrator, but he is not as charismatic and as brilliant as Julius Caesar. And Lepidus basically shied away. Okay? He didn't have the confidence to challenge Octavian for the ultimate power. And seeing this lack of confidence and this insecurity, his soldiers basically went off to join Octavian. Okay? And a lot of soldiers did that. A lot of soldiers that were fighting for the enemy's side would just jump ship because Octavian is the heir of Julius Caesar. Okay? He is the new Julius Caesar, and they all worship Julius Caesar. All right? Now, let's look at Octavian. Why did Octavian succeed so much? Again, he became partners with Marcus Agrippa, who was a much better general than him. But Octavian, again, he was not a brilliant man. He was not charismatic. He was not a great general. But he believed himself to be the heir to Julius Caesar. For whatever reason, Julius Caesar believed in him. And therefore, he had a responsibility to finish the legacy of his father, okay, which is to restore the Roman Republic. And that meant he had to do whatever sacrifice was necessary in order to do so, okay? So the difference between Octavian and the others was he acted. He wasn't very successful, but he was willing to act, whereas Marcus Brutus was not willing to act. And when you act, sometimes you will succeed, okay? And only a few successes will allow you to become the emperor of Rome. He was driven by the fact that he believed himself to be the heir of Julius Caesar. He was a son of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar believed in him. Therefore, he has a responsibility to restore the Republic. And that's why he trusted Marcus Agrippa. Okay? And that's why Marcus Agrippa trusted him. They were all fighting for the legacy of Julius Caesar. And that's why ultimately the Roman people allow Octavian to amass so much power. Right? So remember, the Roman people have been taught to fear kings. But over time, Octavian was in power for 40 years. Okay? Augustus Caesar was in power for 40 years. Over time, he became even more powerful than a king. This is what he did. He amassed all powers to himself. After he conquered Egypt, he made Egypt into his own personal property. Okay? This was his part of the state. He used all the money from Egypt. And again, remember, Egypt is right now, and for the longest time, the wealthiest country in the world at this time. Okay? They have so much wealth. He used his money in order to have his own army. Before, the Roman army was loyal to the Senate. Now, because it was Octavian himself who personally paid every soldier in the army, which is now a professional army, they're now loyal to the emperor. Okay? He took Gaul, which was, which was land that Julius Caesar basically depopulated with genocide, and he gave the land to his veterans. Okay? So basically, he made the entire army loyal to him personally. So he now has the power of God. The Roman people allowed him to do that because they believed that, like Julius Caesar, Octavian was driven by his sense of mission, his desire to save and restore the Roman Republic. But ultimately, because they believed him too much, Augustus Caesar would destroy the Republic and concentrate all power in his hands. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. Any questions? Yeah?
Why did Julius Caesar name Octavian as his heir but not Mark?
Okay, that's a great question. Okay. So why did Julius Caesar name Octavian as the heir and not Mark Antony? Okay. So Octavian is the great nephew of Julius Caesar. So Octavian was Julius Caesar's sister's grandson, okay? And so Octavian basically grew up with Julius Caesar. Like, they knew each other very well. But as Echo says, Mark Antony is the man who was most loyal to Caesar, okay? The most trusted lieutenant of Caesar. Why didn't Caesar trust him? And the answer is, Caesar, as a genius, he doesn't care about loyalty. He cares about talent. He cares about ability. And Mark Antony was a notorious hothead. He had a violent temper. He was a drunk, okay? I mean, he just had like terrible personal qualities. So an example of this is while Caesar was off campaigning against Pompey, he put Mark Antony in charge of Rome. And all Mark Antony did was piss everyone off. He got in fights with the Senate. He was so bad that Caesar had no choice but to replace him with Lepidus. Okay? So Mark Antony was a notorious hothead. He was emotionally unstable. He was emotionally volatile. And so Caesar didn't really trust him, even though Mark Antony would give his life for Caesar. Does that make sense? Okay? So Octavian was considered much more competent, much more level-headed. And Caesar was correct in his assessment, because Octavian was a brilliant political manipulator, okay? Being an emperor is very hard. He was emperor for 40 years. So he had to balance all these different political factions within Rome, okay? So great question, Echo. Okay, any more questions or comments about this argument? Is it all clear?
I can just make a comment to say something.
Sure.
Give you a great. You were talking about how taboo it would be to kill someone in the Senate.
Yes,
right?
That's right.
And I remember feeling that. Like I've traveled to different places in the world. I've been to the Palace of Versailles in France. I've been to what's called the Hermitage right now, or the Winter Palace in Russia. Like both places where there were violent revolutions, right? Where revolutionaries came in and killed the king and so on, right? And I always understood that in the abstract, but like when you actually symbols of power and wealth,
Yeah.
you start thinking about those assassinations differently. That like just how taboo it would have been, like how you were going against every symbol of.
That's right.
That you would have been surrounded with growing up in any sort of perspective growing up. You had to cross every.
That's right.
Every Rubicon.
So yeah, I mean, it was very hard to kill Caesar, okay? So they were in the Senate. There were 60 conspirators, okay? They all brought knives. They hit the knives, the daggers, in the toga, okay? They were all supposed to, like, lunge Caesar together. So, but only five senators actually physically attacked Caesar. Everyone else just stood paralyzed. Because, as you said, it was taboo. It was the ultimate taboo to commit violence in the Senate. So they were all paralyzed by this fear, even though they had this intense hatred of Caesar. Okay? They had, for months, imagined how they would go about killing Caesar. Okay? They had this plan meticulously. But when it came to actually acting it out, they couldn't do it. Only five actually managed to take out their dagger and stab Caesar. In fact, the first person who attacked Caesar stood behind Caesar while Caesar was talking to the Senate, and he was shaking, okay? And he only managed to, like, pinprick Caesar in the back, okay? This is where we get the idea of backstabbing from. Okay? So, and Caesar didn't really notice. He was like, hey, what are you doing, man? Okay? Caesar wasn't really hurt by this. Even Caesar, even though he was being attacked, could not imagine that anyone would be so bold enough to break all these taboos and attack him. Okay, so I mean, it was an incredible act that forever changed Roman history. All right, it was just unimaginable that anyone could attack anyone in the Senate, like physically. Okay, especially the dictator, the Julius Caesar, who was considered divine and sacred by the Roman people. Okay, so it was an incredible act of violence. Okay, and only 5 people actually participated in attacking him. And it took a very long time because it was so hard to muster the strength to stab Caesar. And again, all these senators are like soldiers, okay? They're physically very strong. They're generals. They're used to killing people. So it wasn't fear of death. It was just fear of breaking this ultimate taboo of this Roman Senate. Okay, so thanks for that, Doug. Any more questions before I finish? Okay. So, Augustus Caesar was considered the first and the greatest emperor of the Roman Empire. And like Julius Caesar, he did not consider himself the emperor. He considered himself like first citizen, okay, or the first man in the Senate. And his responsibility was to ensure the eternal prosperity and stability of the Roman Republic. And so towards his old age, he had to consider he had to consider the problem of succession, right? He was a great emperor, but the second emperor had to be great as well. And so his solution was this. His solution would be he would adopt the most competent relative that he had to be emperor. And he would create this new system where emperors would be adopted. Okay? So the best man in Rome would always be adopted into the imperial throne. And Augustus Caesar had the perfect man. His name was Germanicus. Germanicus was very much like Julius Caesar. Brilliant speaker, loved by his soldiers. The problem was that he was too young, okay? Germanicus was too young, so he needed a transition. And so he appointed his stepson, Tiberius, who was pretty old at this point, okay, to be the transition. Tiberius was not charismatic. He was not very popular, but he was competent. He was a competent administrator. He'd be emperor for like 5 to 10 years. And then when Germanicus came of age, then Germanicus would inherit the throne. And he'd be a good emperor. And as a good emperor, you would then be able to find someone else who had good talent, and you would appoint him the next emperor. If you had this system could go on forever, right? And so this is a blunt system. The problem was Tiberius, okay? Tiberius didn't like the idea that he could not appoint his successor, okay? So what did he do? Well, he killed Germanicus. But not only did he kill Germanicus, he killed basically all of Germanicus' family, okay? And not only did he kill Germanicus' family, but he killed a lot of people, okay? And then he adopted someone named Caligula, who was Germanicus' youngest son, to be the emperor. And Caligula was a notoriously bad emperor, okay? So this system broke down very quickly. Even though Augustus Caesar, his intention was to continue the legacy of Julius Caesar and create an eternal prosperity for the Roman Republic. Okay? And by the time you got to Tiberius, the system collapsed. And you could make the argument that Tiberius marked the death of the Roman Empire. Okay? The Roman Empire would continue for another 300 years, but it's basically dead. Okay? Meaning that it was racked by all these internal revolt and internal tensions. And it was only because of its size and inertia that it was able to continue for so long.